In our submission to the Asia Century Task Force exercise, Andrew McIntyre and I emphasised, first of all, of course, the opportunities that did indeed exist and will grow in the region. We then looked at how successful Australia had been in the recent past in coming to terms with and benefiting from and working with that change in our region, and emphasised therefore the continuation of the policies that had been positive and useful there, and a number of those included areas like reform in Australia and free trade and negotiations of a more general socio-political kind too, soft diplomacy in our region. But beyond that, we thought it was time to grasp exactly the importance also for the forthcoming century of it not only being the Asian century but the knowledge century, and that we felt that knowledge should be at the centre of recommendations for bringing these two powerful forces together, and therefore policies that enhanced Australia's generation of knowledge, its ability to utilise knowledge, general as well as Asia Pacific, should be the centrepiece of policies for such a white paper. Naturally, coming from universities, we're very focused on the role universities could play. We know them best and can speak to what they can do and might need. And we thought there it was time for what you might call a third wave of university engagement in our region. The first wave was the Colombo Plan era, which served us so well in linking Australia to many of the future leaders in Asia. The second wave is when we had mass commercial education, many international students coming to Australia, which is also a great investment in our future, all those linkages and contacts. But a third wave, we thought, was one that went to a broadening and a deepening beyond those previous approaches. We felt there that what we needed was a lot more research linkages, more Australian students going to study in the region, international students spreading out across different faculties, many more campuses than they had in the past, and also our vocational education and training joining the universities strongly in reaching out to work with the countries around us in the Asia Pacific. So that was a strong third wave university and wider education emphasis that we thought could be a key foundation of a white paper. It was good in the sense that it had vision, and we've been lacking vision in the recent politics of Australia. It was also whole of government, that is, it covered all the departments of government, just didn't leave something to one department, a specialised area. It even sought mutual responsibility from elsewhere in our society, from business, from community organisations, unions, media, and that was a good thing to make this a, dare we say, a whole of Australia exercise. And within all that, it put people and productivity at the core, and we think that's exactly the focus that was needed. So in its big picture, it was an excellent white paper. However, it didn't colour in the foreground quite as much as one might like for a big picture, and there's a lot of detail that remains to be done. It was big on vision, but small on new initiatives, new activities, and any detailed plan as to how to go forward. What it missed out on, what was disappointing, was really the lack of major commitment to detail, to a sequence, to a plan, to what would be done over time, even if not now. We're all aware of the so-called fiscal restraints upon government, but there's a possibility of outlining where we would go when resources permit and once negotiations take place. And that was lacking. What you got was a lot of emphasis on policies that are already committed by government, and naturally a government can't miss the opportunity to reiterate what it thinks it's doing well, but it didn't take that forward in detail. So in the university area, for instance, it did mention the commitment to scholarships for young Australians to study overseas. It did mention the increased spending that's going on more students in Australian universities, but these were existing policies. It didn't talk about, say, a new major research plan for collaborative research with the major leading universities in the region. It didn't talk about how we might find ways of, say, extending the HEC scheme to overseas students to come to Australia and reduce the difficulties and costs of accessing what currently, under our exchange rate, is a pretty expensive place to come and study. So it could have started to indicate how it would move forward on those. It could have set up inquiries, even though it might have been criticised for not acting quite so quickly, but not even starting an inquiry on, say, how HECS might extend to international students. I mean, it did come up short, and to that extent we're waiting for it to move forward a bit more enthusiastically now. The one thing that wasn't there that we would suggest is an expanded research integration scheme across the region. That is, collaboration between Australian universities and the leading universities of the region. A little like the European Commission does in Europe, we would like Australia to do that for our region. If you like, an Asia plan for research where Australia is the principal funder and extends itself into the region, but collaboratively, so that Australian universities benefit alongside the universities of Asia that are now emerging as leading universities. The two together could add up to a powerful new addition to global knowledge, and dare I say it as an economist, all the research indicates that there's a high payoff to this sort of research. To put a number on it, for instance, the average payoff from public investment in research is about 20% rate of return. The cost of capital to government is about 7%. That's a bargain. You borrow at 7, you get a return at 20, and research is just that return. And along the way you buy a heck of a lot of goodwill and good knowledge that you can't put into those numbers. So that we see that as a real way in which our area of interest, the universities, could substantially contribute to our future and a wider future. Well, the willingness to implement. We think that the detail is what's needed, and in the current financial circumstances that's going to be a bit difficult to make commitments. But an anticipatory sequence would seem appropriate, because government has promised, in this case the present government has promised, that we will be in surplus at the next budget, and a surplus means you can commit, for instance, the surplus to enhancing the education investment fund that we have in Australia. That fund in turn can then be used to generate revenue once the monies are appropriated, topped up into the fund, and you could commit that fund, which wouldn't depend upon future budgets. So dedicating surpluses for some years to the Education Investment Fund and saying that it shall fund the Asia Century initiatives would be the sort of commitment, and then a planning by the Education Investment Fund Board for the initiatives that those funds could go to as the returns come in. So we could envisage, for instance, specific commitments of funding into the future that don't compromise the government capacity to run its budgets properly, but show a real commitment to where we want this country to go in knowledge, linking up to Asia through the broader vision of the white paper. The indications are that the plan so far is actually being very well received in our region. It's very Australian oriented, what's in this for Australia, but at the same time it presents that in a way that's win-win. That is, you can see ways in which nations collaborating with a country that is sensitive to their culture, background, environment, context, circumstances is beneficial for all. It's beneficial economically, which I as an economist think about, but you can also see the geopolitical and social and cultural gains from this pretty clearly and pretty readily. So here's an outpost of former European empire that now wants to embrace the region and be part of that region, and is saying so sensitively and with a clarity about how its present policies contribute to that, and a good hint as to how it will contribute so in the future through new policies. And I think just like we in Australia, many people in our region will be coming back to our government of whatever persuasion, because this has received a fair degree of bipartisanship within the country. We'll be coming back to Australia saying, that was a great white paper, and now what's happening on its implementation? Where's it going? What have you delivered now? And I think that'll put some really nice pressure coming from not just the dynamics of Australian domestic politics, but the dynamics of the politics of our region on the government of Australia. So what we've got now is a down payment that's going to keep paying, because people are going to keep asking, where is it going, what's happening? And that's a great thing. It'll be external pressure, not local parochial politics.